Welcome to What's the Scenario with PLRB, where we explore claims coverage scenarios relevant to insurance professionals. I'm Alissha Watley.
I'm Tim Havler.
And I'm Mike Brode.
All right, Tim, what's the scenario?
Your friend Joan was growing 3 cannabis plants in her home in Hawaii. They were mature plants almost ready for harvest. They were going to be medical marijuana for personal use to help treat her epilepsy. The day before she intended to harvest them, the heat lamp malfunctioned and caused the crop to burn in a small fire.
Oh, no.
Joan submitted a claim under her homeowner's policy for the basement damage and the loss of her cannabis plants, claiming each plant was worth $2,000.
Nice.
The adjuster is wondering about coverage for the plants. He looks closely at the HO3, can't find any exclusions that seem on point. So he's wondering if cannabis can be covered under the 2011 ISO HO3. So today's episode is all about illegal property. So nobody has to share anything they don't want to share. But I will say, if you've ever done Superbowl squares, you've probably participated in an illegal gambling operation.
Well,
Yeah,
thankfully,
so-
I've never done anything like that, right, Alissha?
I plead the fifth, I think.
That's still legal, so you're allowed to plead. You're allowed to have a fifth. That's fine. I will say, Tim, that in the news alert, the citizens of Ohio just voted to allow now for recreational marijuana usage in Ohio. And I think you can have up to 6 plants for personal use here in Ohio, which is apparently better than your friend Joan had.
Interesting. I did not know that about the great state of Ohio. Here in Illinois, I believe medical is legal. Although I can't-
Residential
can't
is
give
too,
you
sir.
the-
You can use it for
I know.
recreational too in Illinois.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, apparently there are places, I don't know this for sure, I'm just saying, in Illinois where you can purchase a certain amount, where you go in a room and apparently you give them an ID and, you can imbibe if you need to, as long as it's text. That's what Illinois needs, right?
Right. And we can tell by your laughing that maybe you've partaken of one of these special rooms. Huh?
I plead the fifth.
That's still legal. There you go.
Yeah, if Ohio has come to the other side, it seems like that's where every state's going, but the federal government just will not move on this.
Yeah, that's crazy. And then you can't bank and all that other interesting stuff. But that's another podcast, right, Tim?
That is another
The
podcast.
banking one.
But hey, I got a question. Tim,
Okay.
how about, so this is a plant that's planted in something that's kind of permanent. So would this be part of your dwelling or would this be personal property, these marijuana plants that were tragically burnt in this fire loss?
Wait, can I say they just went up in smoke?
Hey, that would be good.
Zing, zing. So the difference between coverage A, dwelling, and coverage C, personal property, there's 2 main factors to look at. One is the degree of attachment or lack thereof. And the other factor is the intent of the person. A good way to think about it is if this person were to sell their house, buy a new house, and move, would they take that thing with them or would they leave it with the home sale?
Oh, Joan is taking those plants. No question.
So I'd say Joan has taken those plants, and I'd also say they're not really permanently affixed to the ground in any sort of real permanent fashion. So, yeah, I think these are definitely going to be coverage C.
Very good.
But isn't there an additional coverage for like trees and shrubs and plants?
Yeah.
That's limited to like $500 per plant?
There is an additional coverage for plants, and you get max $500 per plant. But the difference here is we're in coverage C, so we get the full benefit of coverage C up to the coverage C limits. You only need to go to that additional coverage when you're in A and coverage A and B, and there's the land exclusion under coverage A and B. So land is land, and land is also things that grow out of the land or the soil. So if you're in coverage A or B, plants are excluded. Now we got to go to the additional coverage. Now we're limited to $500. But in coverage C land, we might as well take all the full benefits of coverage C.
Wow. I didn't know that one, Tim. That's interesting. Well, thank you. But what about this one, Tim? Riddle me this. Marijuana, at least in some places, I don't know what Hawaii's like where Joan's at, but it can be an illegal product. And kind of like you said, federally, it's still, I think, illegal. So how can we cover illegal products under our homeowners policy? How can that happen?
Or can it happen?
Or can it happen? Even better question.
So in Section 2, there's an exclusion for controlled substances, but
Right.
that's not in Section 1 at all. There's no exclusion for controlled substances, no illegal property exclusion. Something I say all the time is that the burden is on the insurance company to prove that an exclusion applies. And if your policy doesn't have that exclusion, you obviously can't rely on it. But now I'm asking you to disregard what I always say. There are a couple of hidden exclusions that aren't actually listed in the policy, but that are still able to be used. The reason is that an insurance policy is just a written contract, and judges will generally enforce the written contract, but it's still embedded within larger social structures. So there's a reasonableness degree. So imagine if Alissha tricked me into signing over the deed to my house in exchange for a Snickers bar, and she got me to sign on the dotted line. There's no way a judge would enforce that because it would be unconscionable or against public policy. So when you take out insurance, there's, I guess you could call it a social implication that what you're insuring is all lawful property. If it's illegal to possess something, the insurance company has a good argument that, hey, we didn't agree to take on that risk. We're conducting our business on the up and up, and we don't insure illegal property. And for the most part, I think that's a good argument, and courts would agree. One final point on this. The CP and BP forms do have an exclusion, even in first-party coverage, for contraband. But for whatever reason, it's just not in the homeowner Section 1. But again, you don't need to write it in there.
We'll see now the movement is towards more legalized medicinal and potentially recreational marijuana. Maybe the homeowners policy drafters were well ahead of the curve on this one and figured, who are we to say that we can't cover such a thing?
Yeah, and there's lots of other illegal property too that would not be insurable, despite
Like
the
what,
fact
Tim?
that there's, I don't know if maybe you guys can help me brainstorm here. I guess what comes to my mind would be exotic pets, a lot of weapons like switchblades, chemicals, maybe fake IDs or fake passports.
I didn't know you had such a criminal mind, Tim.
I know, exactly.
I think we need to get a criminal lawyer on here. Fireworks in some states.
True.
Illinois, everyone in Illinois goes over to Indiana to buy them.
And I think if you look in that cabinet behind Alissha, she's got some Cuban cigars in there.
I might.
Contraband.
Okay, I'm guilty. All right, so do you think the federal government is ever going to legalize marijuana?
I think eventually they will, but I mean, my opinion is just one among many. Like we were talking about before, it seems like that's the trend. It seems like we're headed in that direction. And then the Obama administration really cut back on any enforcement, but didn't touch the illegality. And then the Trump administration went the other way. And now with Biden, I haven't heard a whole lot lately. So yeah, your guess is as good as mine. At the end of 2023 here, we're still illegal federally.
I would suspect potentially if we could get some tax revenue off of said sale of recreational and or medicinal marijuana, that might be a triggering factors for the federal government to look at.
And I think a lot of state legislatures have had that exact same thought.
Oh, yeah. Are there any other of those crazy little unnamed exclusions out there that exist, even though maybe don't know about them in the policy. Tim, is there any other hidden little gems out there that you're aware of?
There's one other big one. It's called the fortuity exclusion, meaning insurance only covers risks and not costs. You don't need to write that in because it's such a basic idea of insurance. You can imagine if a restaurant decided to have major renovations done, so they had to go out of business for a month, but they planned the whole thing and then they submitted a business income claim. Well, they're not getting income loss for that month because they knew that it was going to happen. It wasn't a fortuitous, unexpected physical loss to the property.
So how about this one, Tim, going back to our hypothetical here with Joan? Any idea what's going on in Hawaii? Is marijuana legal? And I guess would that even have an impact on coverage? And under coverage C, since you said it didn't really exclude illegal materials.
Yeah, so Hawaii, I did look up very specifically. Hawaii was the first state to decriminalize medical marijuana way back in 2000. It's legal in Hawaii to possess up to 4 ounces, legal to cultivate personally for medical patients up to 7 plants per person. So what Joan did was definitely legal under Hawaii law and not legal under federal law. Now, it's not like the feds are going to show up at Joan's door and bust it down and arrest her for the plants, but technically it's still illegal. It's a what's the phrase? Schedule
something.
1 controlled substance. So that's, Schedule 1, that's like heroin, ecstasy, LSD, mushrooms, and a whole bunch of others.
But if the federal government out there, FBI, maybe they're listening to our podcast, Tim. Now they'll know what Joan's up to.
I'm Joan.
You never know.
I think we're getting a little paranoid, Mike.
Oh, there you go. That's one of the issues with potential.
You never know. They could be listening and tracking it back.
Yep.
Well, I have a question. So based on the hypothetical and all the things that we've talked about, is Joan entitled to coverage for plants? Plain and simple.
Plain and simple. Oh, if only it was plain and simple.
I know, right?
You can imagine if you're the judge on this one, here you have property that's half legal and half not legal, and the half not legal government doesn't really bother to enforce it anyway. There's one federal district court in Hawaii that held there was no coverage for marijuana because even though it was legal under state law, it was still illegal under federal law, so they would not enforce a contract that was contrary to public policy. Joan lives in Hawaii. We might think, hey, great, we can use that case as precedent and say that there's no coverage for her plants either. Not so fast. It's a federal district court, which is the lowest level federal court. So first, it's a trial level, so it's not binding precedent. Second, federal court holdings aren't binding on state law. So it's called persuasive authority. It's not binding. There's one other case in this from Colorado that went in the completely opposite direction. Although in that case, the insured was a retail medical marijuana business, and the insurance company knew exactly what was going on when they chose to provide insurance. So the court emphasized that fact and didn't really want to let them get away with insuring something, collecting premiums, and then not paying out on it. So overall, in Hawaii, I would lean towards saying illegal property is in fact excluded. But when you start to see splits like this in the courts, there's some uncertainty.
Well, then how about this one? Given that, and great question, Alissha, is ISO or any of the policy form producers and drafters, are they coming up with any language that might address this whole illegal property issue?
Yes, the brand new 2022 ISO form put in a lot of language about cannabis. The long and short of it is the following is now property not covered explicitly. Cannabis, meaning any good or product that consists of or contains any amount of THC, regardless of whether natural or synthetic, including the cannabis plant, seeds, stems, flowers, stalks, and roots, and byproducts, resin, oil, or wax, hash or hemp, infused liquid, or edible cannabis. That definitely includes marijuana. Now, that does list two exceptions. One would be if a licensed entity prescribes medical marijuana, okay, and two, goods or products containing or derived from hemp, including, for example, seeds, food, clothing, lotions, oils, or extract, if those are in compliance with state law. So, bravo ISO, they laid it out there really clearly. If under the new form, if there's a question about gummies or seeds or whatever, it's pretty clear how it would be treated.
Awesome. And I know you're going to wrap up, Tim, but I'm curious. So in this case, just help me out because I'm a simple man doing the best I can. Even though illegal property might not be specifically excluded under Joan's current policy, still might not be coverage because of the federal courts that were saying that, hey, you can't contract for something that's illegal. Was that
correct? That would be kind of the unnamed exclusion. So we can imagine that there's an exclusion for illegal property. Now, what we said is it's half legal and half not legal, but there's a good chance a court, especially a Hawaii court, would say that half legal, it's still, or half illegal is still illegal for purposes of coverage.
It's only a little bit illegal. I mean, geez. All right, so Tim, I'm going to pass it back to you. What can we take away from the scenario?
Okay, let's recap. Homeowners' policies, generally speaking, do not cover illegally possessed property on the grounds that either it's against public policy or there's no lawful insurable interest in it. Our insured Joan was growing marijuana for medicinal purposes, which is legal under Hawaii state law, but still illegal under federal law. One federal district court sitting in Hawaii held that marijuana was uninsurable as against public policy because of the federal laws. But there's also case law to the contrary in other jurisdictions, and it should be regarded as an unsettled matter. Finally, newer forms, including the 2022 ISO Homeowners 3, have inserted language into the policy addressing cannabis, THC, hemp, CBD oil, more specifically. So, Mike, where can an adjuster go to learn more?
Well, of course, plenty of information out of our website. If you check out, there's some homeowners policy annotations out there that might be helpful. We have a couple webinars that are cannabis related, so check that out, search for it. And there's also some great coverage questions on theft of marijuana covered under a homeowners policy that you can find at plrb.org. And Alissha, where can somebody find those show notes? Can we share them?
Oh, sure. Sure, we can share show notes. Try saying that really fast. So yes, you can find a recap of the key points of this episode, links to our social media, information on how to submit your own adjuster story down in the show notes. Also, don't forget to subscribe and rate us. So thanks for joining us here on What's the Scenario. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.
See ya.
The views and opinions expressed in this resource are those of the individual speaker and not necessarily those of the Property and Liability Resource Bureau, its membership, or any organization with which the presenter is employed or affiliated. The information, ideas, and opinions are presented as information only and not as legal advice or offers of representation. Individual policy language and state laws vary, and listeners should rely on guidance from their companies and counsel as appropriate.